Grace and peace be with all of you. In the Bible, food and God are always intimately connected. And that was true in the ancient world in general, not just for Jews or Christians once that became something, but also for pagans, for pretty much every religion, because in the ancient world, people lived on the edge of starvation, by and large. It was an agricultural economy. In this part of the world, it was basically desert. And so if there wasn't enough water, if the sun didn't shine in the places it needed to shine at the right time during the growth of the crops, if locusts or other pests got in and ate the fruit before it could be harvested, or if the watchmen were not reliable and wild animals got in and ate the crops, it was a disaster not only for the individual farmer, it was a disaster for the entire community. And people went hungry. The other thing about food in the ancient world was that food and shared meals were the place where people were evaluated, I guess is the right word, where their honor and relative worth compared to the other people at the meal was declared in a public setting. I think that's not as clear as I want it to be. So you may remember the stories, the parables, and all the various banquets in the Gospels and even in the Old Testament. First of all, in order to have a place at the table, you had to be invited. You had to be worthy of being there. And then once you were invited, declared worthy to come in and share that meal, and that meant already that many people were excluded, including women. Once you were invited in to the table, then it mattered where your place card was, where you were seated, because certain seats were the seats of honor, other seats had less honor. And we hear some of that when Jesus' disciples are asking to sit at his right hand and his left at that final messianic banquet. But this was the everyday reality of meals, and it didn't just matter where you sat. Depending on your status at that meal within that particular grouping of people, that determined how much food was put on your plate, the quality of the food you received. So it also determined what sort of meal you were served and how much food you got. And this was true at every communal gathering. So day in and day out, food was not just associated with the blessing and care and protection of God, God's ability to send rain and sun and guard the harvest from harm. But every meal was also associated with your worth as a human being. And all these things are tied up in our gospel reading today, because at a wedding, which was a multi-day affair with eating and drinking for days, people brought gifts not the way we do now, not for the future household of the couple, no blenders and toasters and towels. What they brought was food and drink to contribute to the joy and abundance of the wedding feast. So guests arrived with gifts of food and wine. And if the food and wine ran out, couple, which would create a dark shadow over their entire married life, but it also would have been a source of shame for the entire community, a sign that they lacked the ability to be hospitable, to take care of those within their family and larger community. And so Jesus is doing a couple of different things here in this gospel. He's not just providing wine so they don't run out. He's also saving them from shame and saying something about God's presence in that place. So this may all sound a little bit historical and maybe interesting, but, having just come off a whole season of too much food and probably too much boozing it up at Christmas parties and New Year's parties, it feels a little distant, I think, or it can. But as we head into a recognition of Martin Luther King Day tomorrow, I'll bring to mind an incident that happened not that far from here and within the lifetime of many of those of you who are listening. And that is 4 young African American college students who went to a Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, and sat down at a counter, the lunch counter, which was for whites only. And the people in the Woolworths refused to serve them, but they continued to sit at that lunch counter and claim their right to be there. And the manager came out and he yelled at them, and they tried to get them to order food over at the standing only takeout counter. We'll give you food, but you have to go over there. You can't sit here. And the police came, and no one could get them to move. And in the end, the manager of the Woolworths closed the shop. And everyone left. The white customers, the white manager, the white police officers, the white employees, and the 4 African American students who dared to sit in seats of human dignity at the lunch counter. And so I think the important thing is not always the food and the wine. I think if God was calling us just to feed the hungry, and I'm not saying that's unimportant, but if the Christian faith were all about filling bellies, then first of all, I think the church probably doesn't do a fabulous job, and we wouldn't be reading the Bible. We would be looking at Amazon for a good example of how to get things people need to them quickly and efficiently. But that's not what we're called to do. As people of faith, we're being given a much more complicated problem. And that's the problem of nourishing, strengthening, and affirming human dignity. That's a problem Amazon doesn't have anything to offer us in terms of teaching, and the Bible has quite a bit. And that's a problem not just of logistics, it's a problem of relationship and community and belonging and mutual respect and accountability. And those are all very complicated problems to solve. And I think our gospel reading gives us some clues about how we go about solving that problem of human dignity for all human beings. First of all, we gather up the resources that we have. Every person who comes to the table brings their gifts, and then we fill extra jars with water, with whatever God has given us as resources, and then we ask for God's help, because judging by human history, we're not very good at solving this problem on our own. So I'll end by grabbing my Book of Common Prayer. If you have yours, you can grab it too. And you'll find in our baptismal covenant that this is in fact what we declare is what we're doing as Christians. On page 305 in the baptismal service, the final two questions: will you seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself? And what do we answer? Individually and in the presence of the community, all of us say, I will, with God's help. And then the last question: will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? And we answer, I will, with God's help. And that's what the Christian life is all about. Amen.